Welcome back to this Institute of Practical Learning video series on finding happiness using the rainbow method. We've reached the violet color, which, using the rainbow analogy, is the final color of the spectrum that humans can detect, and it's also analogous with finding happiness. And we call this the violet zone, or life, the universe and everything, because we've gone through all the earlier stages from self and family, groups, the world, the country, all sorts of things, and we've reached what's closer to a philosophical stage. But in reality, it's much more about helping you find reason, find purpose, and as you pursue your life, finding the happiness that you deserve. The reason we use how you see color or ordinary white light and know that it's broken up into multiple colors, and as you've grown up you've learned to detect what those colors are, so now you have no difficulty within your mind seeing different colors. So if I talk to you about red or blue or yellow or green or whatever, you can visualize what those colors are. Now, those pathways that you're using are actually built up from basic materials, basic detectors in your mind and in your eyes. There's things called rods and cones and chemical molecules and stuff that help you build up that picture. Now, you can build up happiness. You can build up your perception of happiness using nearly identical pathways. And once you've learned to do that, those pathways will go into what's called your declarative memory, and you won't forget them. Just as if you can ride a bike, you don't forget how to ride a bike. If you can swim, you don't forget how to do that. It's this area that's sometimes called semantic memory, usually called declarative memory. So it goes in there, you use it subconsciously, and it's available to you. And by following this series, you are going to clear out those pathways, because the pathways are there, ready and waiting for you to use. Without you realizing it, your subconscious mind is already making sure those pathways to happiness are going to be available to you as and when you decide to use them. When you sleep every night, hopefully you do, your subconscious mind is processing the experiences of the day before you go to bed, and it's sorting through what's useful from what you learned and did today, and it's storing them up into particular parts of your mind, so that as you dream and just rest, that your metabolism and your mind is being prepared to optimize the next day. And if you think about it, you will realize that in those first few moments when you wake up, typically for 20 seconds, sometimes people are lucky and they keep going for about 3 minutes, all sorts of new thoughts come into your mind, and that is your subconscious readying you for the day. Now, if you watch young children, typically from 4 to 10, in fact, they are naturally happy. They have far less cluttering their brains. Whereas as you go to school and suffer, as it were, the adolescent process, all sorts of brambles and things grow up over those happiness paths and make it harder for you to see happiness. But by analyzing what's going on using the rainbow method, you will be able to see quite clearly the various areas, the places where you can find those happiness points or tokens. So let's get on with it, and let's do this final stage, which, as I say, is life, the universe, and everything, and where you're going to find your suggested 3 tokens in that particular happiness zone. To help find those precious tokens, it helps a lot to understand fundamental human behavior. and the 4 primary drivers that every person experiences. So let's talk about those 4. The first thing is it is natural for human beings to want to make things. Sometimes they create things if there's no solution available, or they will exploit things. For example, pick up a stone or a bone or branch or whatever, but they will use those tools in order to make things. The second important driver is change. People always want change. Now, that was less true 100,000 years ago, but modern man has become restless, and the societies that we live in are in themselves restless. So if you're going to find happiness in the modern world as it is today, you need to understand change and the drivers to do with your personal change and the change that the society is making around you, and indeed the climate is making around you. So it's thinking about and understanding the nature of change. The next important driver is you are naturally curious. It's just something about human beings. They are curious. They want to know what's on the other side of the hill. They naturally explore. Now, if you look at most creatures, as long as they've got a reasonable environment around them, they don't wander off and go and explore anywhere else. They just exist in that place, provided there's enough food. But human beings aren't like that. Human beings are curious. And if you watch pretty well any newspaper or article or film or adverts especially, they're all about trying to get you to be curious, to know the answer. Of course, you start off wanting to know what it is and how much it's going to cost, but they don't tell you that until they've established the value, because they know they can build up your interest on that solution or product simply by exploiting your curiosity. And then at the end of it all, they'll actually tell you what it is. And if you're lucky, they'll tell you what it's going to cost, or more likely, they'll try and get you to take an action and subscribe or something like that, and then gradually you will find out what the real price is. So that's exploring and curiosity. And the final really strong driver is human beings like to solve problems. If you think of the popularity of things like puzzles and crossword puzzles and doing any kind of puzzle, you will see that people naturally like solving problems. And sometimes they get bored very quickly. If it's an easy problem and they know how to solve it, they get bored and they want a more complicated problem. So there's this continuous desire, this driver within human beings to solve more and more problems. In part 2 of this Life, the Universe and Everything Violet zone for collecting happiness points, we're going to map those basic drivers onto exactly where you can find tokens. Of course, they're just suggestions. You must decide for yourself what kinds of tokens you want to collect. But we're going to give you some pretty good guidance based on a lot of years of experience and a lot of success with other people. So party on, and let's move on to part 2 of this IPL video on finding